The story of New York's architectural history begins in the 1600s. When the city was nothing more than a small Dutch settlement known as New Amsterdam, this early period shaped the foundation of New York's future identity, though the buildings of that time were simple, modest, and practical. Instead of the steel and glass towers that we associate with New York today, the city's first structures were made of wood, brick, and stone. They reflected the needs of settlers who had recently crossed the Atlantic Ocean and were struggling to survive in a new land. The settlement stretched across the southern tip of Manhattan Island. Its streets were narrow and winding, often muddy, and lined with wooden houses with steep gabled roofs, a design borrowed from Dutch traditions. These roofs helped snow slide off during the harsh winters. Houses were only 1 or 2 stories tall, built close together for warmth and safety. Shops, taverns, and markets appeared along cobblestone streets, creating the earliest sense of urban life in New York. One of the most important buildings in this period was Fort Amsterdam. Built by the Dutch West India Company, the fort protected the settlement from outside threats and served as a symbol of authority. Nearby, small stone churches were constructed, not just for worship, but also as centers of community gatherings. These early public buildings were often plain in style, but vital in function. When the British seized control of the colony in 1664, they renamed New Amsterdam to New York. With this change came subtle shifts in architecture. Brick began to replace wood as the primary material, leading to sturdier, more fire-resistant houses. English building traditions influenced design, yet the Dutch gabled style continued to leave its mark. Though few original colonial buildings remain today, traces of this early architecture can still be found in preserved districts and historical sites. Walking through parts of Lower Manhattan, one can sense the spirit of those first settlers who laid the groundwork for what would become one of the greatest cities in the world. The colonial era may look simple compared to the towering skyline that defines New York today, but it represents the beginning of the city's architectural journey, a journey that transformed a small European settlement into the modern metropolis we admire. The 19th century was a period of extraordinary growth for New York City. By the early 1800s, it had become the leading port of the United States, and waves of immigrants brought new cultures, ideas, and architectural traditions. The skyline of the city was still relatively low compared to modern standards, but its character began to transform rapidly. One of the most iconic features of this century was the rise of brownstone houses. Built with reddish-brown sandstone, these elegant row houses filled neighborhoods in Manhattan and Brooklyn. They became a symbol of stability and middle-class prosperity. Walking down a street lined with identical brownstones gave New York a distinct residential charm that still survives today. Industrialization also reshaped architecture. The introduction of cast iron revolutionized construction. Stronger and cheaper than stone, cast iron allowed architects to design larger windows and more decorative facades. The SoHo district in Manhattan remains the best example of this movement. Its ornate cast iron buildings gave beauty to otherwise industrial warehouses, blending utility with elegance. At the same time, public buildings reflected a fascination with European revival styles. Greek Revival courthouses, Gothic Revival churches, and Italianate mansions were scattered across the growing city. Churches like Trinity Church on Wall Street became iconic landmarks with tall spires rising above the cities. As transportation improved, New York expanded outward. The opening of the Erie Canal in 1825 made the city the gateway to the American interior, bringing wealth and population growth. This prosperity financed more ambitious architectural projects, including theaters, government halls, and cultural institutions. By the late 1800s, the demand for taller commercial buildings grew. Although true skyscrapers were not yet possible, architects experimented with new heights, and the city became a laboratory for vertical growth. The 19th century thus set the stage for New York's transformation into the skyscraper capital of the world. The mid-19th century introduced one of New York's most iconic and innovative architectural movements, cast iron architecture. This style became especially popular in the 1840s to 1880s, transforming the look and identity of downtown Manhattan, particularly in the district now famously known as SoHo. At a time when New York was rapidly industrializing, cast iron provided architects and builders with new opportunities to design facades that were not only strong and durable, but also visually striking. Unlike traditional stone or brick, cast iron could be molded into intricate patterns at a fraction of the cost. This allowed for elaborate columns, cornices, and decorative details that looked like expensive European stonework. The facades of cast iron buildings were often painted to resemble stone, fooling the eye and elevating the city's architectural reputation. Many of these buildings featured large windows, made possible by the strength of iron beams, which created bright interiors for workshops, factories, and showrooms. SoHo, short for South of Houston Street, became the epicenter of this architectural boom. Walking through the neighborhood even today, one can see rows of cast iron buildings with their signature tall windows and intricate designs. These structures housed textile factories, printing shops, and warehouses, reflecting New York's role as an industrial and commercial hub. One of the most famous examples of cast iron architecture is the Howell Building. Constructed in 1857, not only is it admired for its ornate facade, but it also holds a special place in history as the site of the world's first passenger elevator installation by Elisha Otis. This innovation foreshadowed the skyscraper revolution that would later define New York. Cast iron architecture also had practical benefits. In case of fire, cast iron frames could better withstand heat than wood. However, architects soon discovered that intense heat could warp or crack iron, making it less reliable than initially believed. Despite these limitations, the style left a permanent mark on New York's Tresca. Today, SoHo's cast iron district is recognized as one of the largest collections of its kind in the world. Many of these former factories have been transformed into art galleries, boutiques, and loft apartments, blending history with modern culture. Cast iron architecture symbolizes a time when New York was both industrial and artistic, practical, yet ambitious and always pushing the boundaries of design. The late 19th century marked a turning point in New York's architectural history, the birth of the skyscraper. As the city's population exploded and land became increasingly expensive, the only way to grow was upward. Advances in steel frame construction and the invention of the safety elevator transformed architecture forever, allowing buildings to soar higher than ever imagined. One of the earliest examples of this revolution was the New York World Building, 1890, which reached our stories. Soon after, the Flatiron Building, 1902, captured the world's attention with its daring triangular design, symbolizing innovation and boldness. It stood not just as an office space, but as a landmark that showed New York's ambition to dominate. The Skyline, the skyscraper boom, reflected New York's status as the financial capital of America. Wall Street and Lower Manhattan became the stage for towers that embodied economic power. The Woolworth Building, completed in 1913, stood as the tallest building in the world for nearly 2 decades. Known as the Cathedral of Commerce, it combined Gothic details with modern steel technology, bridging old-world elegance with new-world progress. These early skyscrapers were not only engineering marvels, but also cultural symbols. They represented optimism, capitalism, and the idea that New York was the gateway to the future. Architects like Louis Sullivan and Daniel Burnham influenced design principles, promoting function with beauty. By the end of the 19th century, the New York skyline had become a unique canvas of steel and stone. Skyscrapers were more than tall buildings, they were statements of power, ambition, and modernity. The 1920s and 1930s introduced a glamorous new style to New York's skyline, Art Deco. This movement was bold, decorative, and modern, embodying the spirit of the Roaring Twenties and the resilience of the city during the Great Depression. The Chrysler Building, 1930, is perhaps the finest example of Art Deco in the world. With its dazzling crown of stainless steel arches and automobile-inspired motifs, it symbolized progress and the machine age. For a brief period, it was the tallest building in the world, before being surpassed by the Empire State Building, 1931. The Empire State Building became the ultimate icon of New York, rising 1,454 feet. It was built in just 13 months, an incredible feat during the Depression. Its clean lines, setbacks, and powerful vertical emphasis defined the Art Deco style. It wasn't just a building, it became a symbol of human determination and New York's unstoppable spirit. Art Deco buildings were not limited to skyscrapers. Smaller structures across the city adopted geometric patterns, stylized decorations, and lavish materials. The style represented optimism, modernity, and elegance. This era left New York with some of its most beloved landmarks, creating a skyline that continues to inspire awe today. By the mid-20th century, architecture in New York shifted toward modernism. Unlike the decorative styles of the past, modernist architecture emphasized simplicity, functionality, and clean lines. Influenced by the Bauhaus movement in Europe, architects began designing buildings that reflected rationality and efficiency rather than ornamentation. One of the most important modernist landmarks is the Seagram Building 1958. It's designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson. Its sleek glass and steel facade revolutionized office tower design. The building's open plaza and minimalist style set the standard for countless skyscrapers worldwide. Modernism also shaped residential architecture. Housing projects like Stuyvesant Town embraced simplicity and efficiency, though sometimes criticized for lacking character. The movement reflected the growing need for functional urban living spaces in a rapidly expanding city. The United Nations headquarters, completed in 1952, symbolized not only architectural modernism, but also New York's role as a global capital. Its glass curtain wall and international style made it an icon of diplomacy and modern design. Modernism stripped away decoration but elevated function, proportion, and material honesty. For New York, it was an era of confidence, business expansion, and global leadership. By the 1970s and 1980s, New York architecture entered the era of postmodernism, reaction against the austerity of modernism. Architects began reintroducing color, ornament, and playful references to history, blending the past with the present. One of the best examples is the AT&T Building, 1984, 550 Madison Avenue, designed by Philip Johnson. Its Chippendale top humorously referenced a furniture design, sparking debates about whether architecture should be serious or fun. Postmodernism embraced irony, symbolism, and creativity. Skyscrapers began to experiment with form. The Lipstick Building 1986 stood out with its curved red facade, while others incorporated unusual shapes, textures, and colors. Unlike the uniform modernist towers, postmodern buildings celebrated individuality. Cultural institutions also adopted bold new looks. The Sony Tower, museums, and theaters pushed design boundaries, making architecture itself a conversation. This period also saw urban renewal. Old warehouses and factories, especially in SoHo and Tribeca, were transformed into lofts, blending historic preservation with modern lifestyles. Postmodernism allowed New York to reimagine itself, not only as a business hub, but also as a cultural playground. By the end of the 20th century, New York had a skyline that combined nearly every style, from Gothic Revival to Art Deco, modernism, and postmodern experiments. The city became a living museum of architectural history, with each building telling its own story. By the late 20th century, New York City was already the world's leader in skyscraper innovation. The construction of modern skyscrapers during this time not only changed the skyline, but also redefined architecture globally. Chrysler Building and Empire State Building set earlier standards, but new icons such as the World Trade Center's Twin Towers, built in the early 1970s, represented boldness, ambition, and the city's economic power. The Twin Towers, designed by Minoru Yamasaki, were engineering marvels. Standing over 1,360 feet tall, they became the tallest buildings in the world at their completion. Their minimalist facade and structural innovations allowed vast open floor plans that suited modern business needs. These towers symbolized globalization. And New York's position as the financial capital of the world, but skyscraper architecture wasn't just about height. Architects sought to blend modern technology with design elegance. For example, the Chrysler Building by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe introduced a sleek, glass and steel aesthetic that influenced office tower design worldwide. This style reflected efficiency, transparency, and progress. Another innovation came with the rise of postmodern architecture, which rejected the strict minimalism of modernism. Buildings like Philip Johnson's AT&T Building, now 550 Madison Avenue, introduced playful, historical references into skyscraper design, proving that even massive structures could carry artistic personality. New York's skyscrapers weren't just buildings, they became cultural icons. Movies, television shows, and photographs made them recognizable symbols of ambition, success, and resilience. Tourists flocked to observation decks, while businesses sought prestige addresses in these towers. The late 20th century also marked the beginning of awareness about urban density and sustainability. Architects experimented with materials that balanced strength with efficiency, paving the way for the eco-conscious skyscrapers of the future. Although the tragic events of September 11, 2001, forever changed the perception of the Twin Towers, their impact on architecture remains undeniable. They were not only engineering achievements, but also cultural symbols, representing both vulnerability and resilience. Modern skyscrapers of this period solidified New York's reputation as a vertical city, a place where ambition touched the sky, and architecture became a universal language of power and progress. As the 21st century began, New York entered a new era of sustainable architecture. With climate change and environmental responsibility becoming global concerns, architects in the city embraced eco-friendly design, integrating green technologies into the skyline. Buildings were no longer judged only by their height or appearance, but also by their environmental impact. One of the earliest examples is the Bank of America Tower at 1 Bryant Park, completed in 2009. This skyscraper was the first commercial high-rise to earn a LEED Platinum certification, the highest standard for sustainable design. It features water recycling systems, advanced air filtration, and materials chosen for minimal environmental impact. Its design set a global precedent for combining luxury, efficiency, and sustainability. Green architecture also meant rooftop gardens and green walls, which helped reduce heat and improve air quality. Projects like the High Line, a former elevated railway transformed into a public park, showed how adaptive reuse could benefit both the environment and the community. In residential architecture, buildings like Via 57 West, designed by Bjarke Ingels Group, combined striking geometry with sustainability. Its pyramid-like form maximizes natural light while providing green spaces for residents. Similarly, Hudson Yards introduced mixed-use complexes with modern eco-friendly technologies, reshaping Manhattan's West Side into a futuristic, sustainable hub. Technology also played a central role. Smart glass, solar panels, and energy-efficient HVAC systems became standard in new projects. Architects focused on reducing a building's carbon footprint while maintaining New York's tradition of bold, iconic design. The movement was not just about architecture, it was about culture. Sustainable buildings symbolized responsibility, innovation, and progress. It reflected New York's ability to adapt, just as it had done through centuries of architectural transformation. Today, the rise of sustainable architecture ensures that New York skyline is not just a monument to ambition, but also a commitment to future generations. The city continues to balance beauty, function, and responsibility, setting global trends in environmentally conscious design. New York's architectural journey has always been about reinvention. Today, the city stands at the intersection of tradition and innovation, blending historic preservation with futuristic visions. Modern projects reflect a balance of art, technology, and sustainability, ensuring the skyline evolves without losing its heritage. One striking example is the One World Trade Center. It's completed in 2014. Rising 1,776 feet, it not only reclaimed the skyline after the loss of the Twin Towers, but also symbolized resilience, unity, and renewal. Its sleek glass design incorporates advanced safety and sustainability features, making it one of the most secure skyscrapers in the world. Meanwhile, projects like the vessel at Hudson Yards showcase how architecture can go beyond buildings and become interactive experiences. The vessel's honeycomb structure invites exploration, blending art and public space in a way that reflects New York's openness to creativity. Residential towers also reached new levels of luxury and design. The 432 Park Avenue skyscraper, with its minimalist square design, and the Steinway Tower 111 West 57th Street, known as the world's thinnest skyscraper, highlight how innovation continues to push boundaries. These towers symbolize wealth and exclusivity, shaping what modern urban living looks like. Technology is also transforming design. The architects now use 3D modeling, AI-driven simulations, and smart building systems that adjust lighting, temperature, and energy use in real time. This creates spaces that are not only visually stunning, but also efficient and adaptive. Looking ahead, New York's architecture faces exciting possibilities. Concepts like vertical gardens, net-zero energy towers, and even floating or modular structures could redefine the skyline. The future promises buildings that are taller, smarter, greener, and more connected to the people who use them. But what makes New York truly unique is its ability to embrace change while honoring history. Walking through the city today, one sees colonial churches standing beside glass skyscrapers, Art Deco icons like the Chrysler Building neighboring futuristic towers. This contrast tells a story of ambition, diversity, and resilience. Ultimately, New York's architecture is not just about buildings, it's about identity. It reflects the city's spirit, bold, diverse, adaptive, and forever striving toward the future. The skyline we see today is only a chapter in an ongoing story, and tomorrow promises even greater wonders.